Within the first month, we did $50,000 in business without any advertising. And within 11 months, we were doing almost as much as the security company. And within 4 years, we were doing 120 million in sales.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to episode 7 of 10 Questions with a Millionaire. I'm James with the School of Hard Knocks, and I'm here with Glen Boyd. He's a founder of a major tech company. We're super excited to be with you today, just kind of ask you some questions about your journey. Could you kind of give us a little rundown about your story?
I started my career really young, teaching myself to program. Then in my early 20s, started a tech company that ended up taking public in '99. It was one of the early dotcom companies. As they say, I got out before it all crashed and did really well. But I took it public and then ended up selling it in a merger later on.
Your first company was originally called EG Software, I believe.
That's correct. Yeah.
At that time, how did you know that that was the idea, that you were going to take it to market? And how did you know that that was the company that you wanted to kind of invest in and go all in with?
The original product was not that. The original product was actually a security product. And what it does is it was like a surveillance system for internal networks, because the internet really hadn't been invented yet, or it wasn't being utilized. But there was a lot of local area networks. Most of the banks and financial institutions were being pushed to put in some type of audit control as more and more things were becoming computerized. I saw an opportunity and wrote a product for logging and analyzing all the traffic and all the access of what goes on a local area network. We had a great, amazing little business. We had the entire Federal Reserve. We had almost every major bank in the U.S. It was me, my partner Ellie, and my wife worked in the business, and my brother-in-law. There was 4 of us, and we were banging out $1 million a year out of a little office about the size of this room. All of a sudden, the internet comes along. Yahoo had gone public, Netscape, and I realized the world's going to change. Here it is. I had been working in local area networks, but now all of a sudden the whole world is becoming networked. And we looked at well, how do we capitalize on that? And I think the analogy I gave at the time to Ellie is I said, look, I see this train going past, and I see people on that train, and they're all got champagne glasses. I said, if we start running now, we might be able to catch the last car of that train, because this is going to be the future. So we spent the whole summer trying to figure out what product we were going to go into and what we were going to do, almost willing to abandon our really successful business. Then I don't know if it was him or me, but we had this epiphany that we pivoted our company. So instead of having this product that analyzed local traffic and looking for, say, security violations in a bank, potential fraud, it started analyzing anonymous traffic that was coming into the web. And instead of producing, say, a security report, it produced a marketing report. So instead of trying to find somebody who's committing fraud, we said, what if you analyze all this anonymous data and identified how many people are interested in this and how many people are interested in that? So some of our earliest clients and customers were people like Sports Illustrated magazine. They had a website, everybody, it was brand new, but they didn't know if they had 100,000 people coming or 10,000 people coming and visiting it 10 times, because there was no product to be able to tell them that. But I had this technology that we had spent years building that could analyze massive amounts of data very quickly, and we pivoted. We had no idea if the product was going to be successful. We didn't know if the dogs would eat the dog food. Within the first month, we did $50,000 in business without any advertising. And within 11 months, we were doing almost as much as the security company. And within 4 years, we were doing 120 million in sales.
A lot of people, they tend to have these great ideas, but they really struggle to get the funding for them. So what do you recommend to people that are trying to get that funding for their ideas to build companies?
Well, it always helps to have something demonstrable and not just an idea. Ideas are really difficult to get funded. And if you can build something that's a sample, something that you can demonstrate, I mean, that goes a long, long way. There's an old expression that I think it was founded in the 70s, and it happened to do with all these advertising companies were creating, I think it was called the dog food wars, where they're creating all these different dog foods, and they spend all this money and they put them on television, but it turns out the dogs just didn't like the dog food. And it didn't matter how great the advertising was or how flashy it was. So the expression, especially in the tech world, was, will the dogs eat the dog food? And what that meant is, will people actually use the product? So often you don't know completely until you build a product or build some of it. And if you can get early adoption, even if it's a small amount, you can typically demonstrate a path to where somebody will be willing to invest in it, because they can say, wow, this is really not only a good idea, but I can see how people are using it and they're really grabbing gravitating towards it, and there's a huge chance of it exploding. I mean, you just look at some of the examples, whether it was YouTube that started out with just cat videos, or Instagram that just started out with people wanting to share some of their personal, photos, to almost every tech company. They started as some little simple idea, but it really went viral, or it really went to the level of the dogs love the dog food.
In today's world, we're seeing a lot of light being shined on self-improvement, personal development. For you throughout your career, what would you say was some of the most pivotal things that you incorporated, whether it was into your routine or just throughout your life, that led you to where you are today?
For any entrepreneur, it's always a challenge, and it definitely was for me, keeping life-work balance. Even more so as I'm older, it's life-health-work balance. Started very young, I had children very young, and I had a high-tech, super successful company very young. Through that process, I ended up divorced early on. Some of that was with the stress of starting a company and having young children and having a young marriage. That was where I think some of that life-work balance broke down. Later on in life, I ended up having a heart attack and a triple bypass surgery. Some of that led to me to realize that I have to, as I'm getting older, take my health almost as seriously as my physical health, as seriously as my mental health, as well as conquering the boredom of life. It's easy to find yourself working too much as an entrepreneur because you love it, but not everybody else around you can appreciate that, and that's where your relationships can suffer, whether it's with your significant other or with your family.
How can someone prioritize their mental health? What were some of the steps that you kind of learned to take during that process to focus on your personal and mental health?
Anybody who's looking for a good entrepreneurial work-life balance, I would encourage them to, partner with somebody. I think there's no way I could have ever built my company if I hadn't have a strong co-partner in founding the company. And we were able to offload a lot of things for each other, whether it was somebody has a personal emergency or just dividing up the work. And finding somebody you trust is critical, and somebody you enjoy working with, and also somebody who has not just complementary but even non-complementary skills, so that you both bring something to the table that the other one doesn't have.
What was the biggest risk that you ever took, and how important has risk been to you?
I had a newborn on the way and gotten down to probably the last, I think, $1,000 in my bank account. Oh, actually, I had some money saved up. I quit my job and started writing my first product, and got down to the last $1,000 into my bank account and went and sold the one asset I had at the time, which was a motorcycle. That got us through another month or two. Then my business partner, and he came on board and put his personal money in, and the two of us together went on to make a very successful company. But to say that I put it all on the line is not an understatement. At the time, my total risk mentality was, the worst thing that can happen to me is I'll have to go get a job. And so for me, it was like, let me take all this risk, even though I had a newborn on the way. I knew that if I failed, I'll just have to go get a job. But I also knew that if I didn't try it, I would be sitting at a job someplace, always wondering, why didn't I try?
When you're creating a company, it's important to build a strong leadership team. What are the 3 most important traits that you look for in people when you're assembling a leadership team or employing people for a company?
Well, I think you have to work with honest people. You have to work with intelligent people. You have to work with people that can take, constructive feedback, and that includes yourself. I think that's critical. You're not always going to get along. Our wives at the time, in our first early days of the founding of the company, they thought that my partner and I were going to kill each other because we were constantly arguing. But what we were doing is really fleshing out the best path forward, or the best idea forward. I remember in the early days, we had some horrendous arguments over which shade of red we were going to make our first packaging on our product. And it turned out to be this inconsequential kind of thing, but eventually through that process, we became closer and closer friends and trusted each other more and more to make independent decisions. And we needed to go through that early on to get to that level of confidence with each other.
What would you say is the worst financial decision that you've made throughout your life?
Getting involved in things you don't want to be involved in. I had this misfortune of doing a construction loan on a business that I really didn't want to be in. I got kind of talked into it with another friend of mine. It was supposed to be a temporary construction loan. Everything was collateralized. The management was failing. I had to step in and spend a couple of my years of my life turning it around, only to have the whole thing, because of a tragic accident, and somebody unfortunately passed away, ended up costing the entire company. I lost close to $3 million on that. And what that taught me is, don't get involved in something you don't want to get involved in. My gut instinct was telling me from day one, don't do it, but I ended up doing it anyway. Then I powered through and thought, And by circumstance, I wished I just never did it.
But what was the best financial decision that you've ever made?
Probably for us, both my partner and I at the time when we founded the company, the best decision was the company was growing so fast. We were profitable, but we felt like we needed additional capital just to expand faster. And we sought out a venture capital firm, and we spent a lot of energy working with them because venture capital can spend and take a lot of attention. It's like there's a courtship that goes on. And in the end, they decided to pass on us. We were kind of glad because we were so frustrated with them and the process. So they ended up not investing in us. What that meant though is we didn't have that financial underpinning that you would with venture capital, but we also were way more frugal with the decisions we made going forward. And when we took the company public, he and I owned 95% of the company.
What is your best piece of advice to someone trying to scale their business?
Keep your expenses controlled. The problem with scaling is that expenses scale as well. The numbers become multiples. So, one bad dip someplace can wipe out your whole business, especially if you're trying to stay profitable, especially if you're trying to grow really fast. Just keep your expenses under control.
What are the 3 books that you'd recommend that any entrepreneur should read?
My favorite that changed it probably saved my business or helped me understand my business. There's actually 2 of them, but one more than anything else. At the time, my business was growing so fast, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what the problems were. I would come home because I'd had these hellaciously stressful days, and I would try to read some just so I could sleep. And I started reading Into Thin Air. And then it clicked for me what the problem was with my company. In the book, he talks about everybody has a level where they run out of oxygen when they go up in altitude. And even the simplest task when you get up to a certain level, like tying your shoes, becomes very, very difficult. And everybody's built differently. And unless you have supplemental oxygen, some people will tap out and it becomes deadly. And the only solution is to go down the mountain. There are some people that are natural athletes who can, or they're Sherpas because they were born with the genetics, their blood to carry the oxygen, can go all the way to the top of Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. Extremely rare, but it does happen. But what I was finding is because my company was growing so fast, somebody that was an employee 6 months ago or a year ago who I hired and was just an amazing employee was failing. And it dawned on me what they were really doing is they were out of oxygen because they had started out and they were working, maybe managing 4 people or 6 people or 10 people. Because that's what I hired them at that level to do. And then a year later or 6 months later, they're managing 20 people or 30 people. And it's the same analogy as if you're good at juggling and you can juggle 3 balls and I hand you a 4th and you're good at that and you hand you a 5th, a 6th, eventually you're gonna reach the level where you're gonna drop all the balls. And what I realized is it was my responsibility to stop handing them balls and also in some cases take them down the mountain. It also changed my hiring practices so that when I would hire somebody, I would say, okay, so I know we were hiring you to manage 20 people and you managed 50 in the past, but you'll be managing 50 people within a year. And I need somebody who's already been up the mountain. So that book to me saved my company, and once we identified that, we changed our hiring practices across the company to hire above the level for the position that we were doing. And people that were used to be good, that were starting to fail, we took them down the mountain and divided up their responsibilities. Another one, which it's great for marketing and if we're launching a new product, is called Crossing the Chasm. And it's talking about the process, and there's this chasm in the bell curve of getting your product across before it gets into adoption. And it really resonated in the early days when we were trying to grow our product and how to launch it into new markets.
You sold your company for over $1 billion.
Yep.
So my question for you is, you made a lot of money off that.
Yep.
Does money buy happiness?
No.
Why?
It just doesn't. I think there's a certain level that money does. I mean, I grew up very poor. I roofed houses as a child in the Texas heat to help my dad, and then later washing dishes with my mother. Yes, money definitely bought happiness when you reach a certain level beyond that. When I finally was able to feel secure enough that I could send my children to college, and that gave me a lot more freedom to try new things. But at a certain level, the champagne doesn't get any better. And at a certain level, the women don't get prettier. At a certain level, the beaches don't get any nicer. Just making more and more money doesn't buy happiness, but there is probably a base level somewhere between poverty and paying all your bills.
If you were to go back to, when you're 18 years old and you could have a conversation with younger Glenn, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you would tell yourself in a conversation with your younger self?
I mean, I definitely would have said enjoy life a little bit more. I mean, I didn't really have a childhood, but that was also because I started working so young and was successful young, but the intensity of it. I had to process that later in my life after I sold my company. It was like actually learning how to enjoy life, not just work. And so I think I would tell my 18-year-old self is like, maybe not be so ambitious and finish college. Maybe not be so ambitious and have a little bit deeper, meaningful relationships here or there. Other advice I'd give myself? I think I would tell myself to take care of my health better, because I think that's the first and easiest thing to let go. As an entrepreneur, when you're working, you just can't get away from working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. Even if you're not physically doing it, you're thinking about it when you're at home, you're here, you're there. That translates into your relationships. Don't spend so much money once you finally make it. Better yet would be get some really good financial advice once you finally do make good money.
We've interviewed hundreds of millionaires, and one of the biggest pieces of advice that they would tell their younger selves is they wish that they would have started sooner. For someone who has all these thoughts and great ideas, and they're always say, oh, I'll start tomorrow, or whether it's a YouTube channel or this company, but you executed, you created a company, you sold it for a lot of money. What is your advice to someone trying to really start and begin their business?
Well, procrastination is your worst enemy, and I think that's what you're getting at. And it's easy to always put it off and not do it and not take the risk. The one thing we do not have in life that's renewable is time. And the longer you delay it, the longer it's going to take you to get to where you want to be. So I think there's an old expression, and I think it's even if you're going to fail fast. Get in there, try it. It didn't work. Move on, do the next thing. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably going to be an entrepreneur your whole life. And if you're going to make a mistake and have a failure, get it out of the way and go learn from that and do the next one. And the longer you delay for that perfect idea, that just means you're that much further away from a success.
Well, guys, that wraps up today's episode of 10 Questions with a Millionaire. We were super excited to be able to sit down here with Glen. Glen, thank you so much for coming on, and it was great to meet you, talk to you, find out more about your story today. So stay tuned, guys, for more content. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you leave us a subscribe. We got a ton of great content coming. Let's get it.